Hello, and welcome to CSCE 289 Foundations of Cybersecurity. Today we'll be talking about symmetric versus asymmetric encryption. So to begin, we'll go ahead and describe what happens without encryption. So essentially what we have here is we have Alice. Off to the left, we have Eve at the top and Bob on the right-hand side. So Alice's objective here is to send a message from herself to Bob, but without encryption, what we see is that when she sends off her message, Eve is able to intercept that message and send it back off to Bob without Bob or Alice ever knowing. So to correct this, we're going to talk about symmetric encryption first. So to begin, what we're going to talk about is this little wax sealer thing. So essentially, for those of you who don't know, the way that people used to verify that they had in fact actually written the message would be they would just take some hot wax and they drip it onto the seal of the envelope, and they take their metal wax sealer and they would just stamp it on there. And so that's an analogy that we're going to be using today. So for those of you who don't know, now you do, congratulations. So the way that symmetric encryption works is that it's the same way as before, except whenever Alice seals that message, she actually takes that metal seal and she just stamps on her particular seal. And because of this, Bob isn't able to actually open that message up. But Bob has Alice's little metal wax sealant thing again, and I know it kind of doesn't really make a whole lot of sense with the analogy here, but essentially just understand that for this particular case, what we're talking about, the metal sealant can only be opened by the metal seal that created it, I guess. I don't know. And so because Bob has Alice's key, he's able to open up that message. So the way that symmetric encryption works is that the key that encrypted the message is the same key that decrypts the message. And so that's really what you need to take away from this particular aspect. Now with asymmetric encryption, we're going to have to define a little bit more terms. So what we're going to call the private keys are those little metal stamps, right? So Alice's private key is her metal little stamp thing, and Bob's private key is that little metal stamp that Bob has, right? And we're going to call public keys the things that everyone can see as the stamp marks on the envelopes themselves, right? So to begin, Alice seals up the message the exact same way as she did before. She sends it off to Bob, but this time Bob actually doesn't have the Alice's metal stamp, so he can't actually open up that message. But what Bob can do is he can stamp his own seal on it. So now neither Alice nor Bob nor Eve can open up that particular message. But here's where it gets interesting. So Alice actually can unstamp her little seal and send it back through Eve, who still can't open it because it still has Bob's seal on it, back to Bob. And now because it only has Bob's seal on it, Bob can actually break that seal and open up the message and see it. And usually the message that's being sent through asymmetric encryption is a key that they can both share. And the reason being is because asymmetric encryption it takes much longer than symmetric encryption. And because of that, it usually has a lot more bandwidth requirements, and generally it's just easier just to do symmetric encryption. Usually this is used in key exchanges. And so basically with the symmetric encryption, Bob and Alice would use that shared key to use to continue communication. Here's a pretty detailed explanation of asymmetric encryption if none of that made sense to you. You can of course read this on your own time if you really want to. But really what it boils down to is Alice and Bob both have some common information that they're agreeing upon. And so in this particular example, they're using paint to describe how this works. So Alice and Bob have some shared paint that they want. And so both Alice and Bob have secret colors. And so when they mix those particular colors, they both have different color arrangements. But what they're able to do is they're able to switch those particular vials of paint, and they're able to add their paint, their secret color paint again, and they both end up with the same color paint at the very end. And so, I mean, it's a different analogy. If you get it through that analogy, that's great. And there's one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is hashing. So essentially, the way that hashing works is, you can see at the very top here, we're taking some hashing function. I believe it might be MD5 hashing. And so you take this hashing function, and you hash this particular phrase, which in this particular case is hello. And so you're getting some type of random string at the very end as an output. And you take another hash, which is this is a sentence, so much longer input. And what you get out is the exact same size as the previous one. And so this is kind of how hashing works. This is kind of why hashing works as well as it does. Is because the size of the output doesn't really mean anything at all. And so basically it's just, hashing is basically just a function that takes some input and outputs a random string. The size, of course, of the input doesn't matter because the output will always be the same. This is a one-directional function, so it's secure. And there are things called collisions, and so basically that's when the output string is the exact same for two inputs, and so that's a security issue. But usually this is hashing is usually used to check the integrity of a file. It's usually called a checksum. So basically what you'll do is you'll take an entire hash of a file. And because the output of the hash is always the same, you can basically just add this on as like, hey, this is the hash that I took, so that if you take the hash of that particular file and it's different, you know that it's been modified. And so there's another thing called salting, but we really don't need to get into that right now. If you have any questions on this particular issue, or if you don't understand something, please send me a message. Yeah, bye-bye.